Yes, MMA fans, what's up? This is Jones, and I want to talk about a certain topic. Which is the bigger fight in MMA? Jon Jones versus Anderson Silva, or Anderson Silva versus GSP? Which one is the bigger fight? Now, we all been hearing it. We all been saying it for a while now. We want to see Anderson Silva versus Jon Jones. We want to see GSP versus Anderson Silva. You want to see Anderson Silva, the best fighter in the world, in my opinion, fight either one of these guys. But which one is the biggest fight? I'm not asking which fight do you want to see the most. I'm asking which one is the bigger fight, the fight that could generate the most money. Now, it seems like to me that people want to see the fight the most, Jon Jones versus Anderson Silva. It seems like to me that people want to see that fight the most. But I don't think we're going to get that fight right now. The fight that we're closer getting is Anderson Silva versus GSP. That's the fight that we're going to get. That's the fight that we're closer to getting. I'm not going to say we're going to get, but that's the fight that we're closer to getting. Although a lot of people want to see Jon Jones versus Anderson Silva, the bigger fight, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, is GSP versus Anderson Silva. And here's the reason why. Because GSP is a bigger draw. Not draw as in he's drawing on a piece of paper, as in he draws the most money. He brings in the most money in the UFC. He the one that has the biggest buy rate when he's fighting. GSP, Georges St-pierre. So Jon Jones is not the number one draw in the UFC. He doesn't bring in the most amount of money, no matter how good of a fighter he is. He doesn't bring in the most amount of money. Hell, not even really Anderson Silva. So it's really GSP, Georges St-pierre. He's the guy that brings in the most amount of money. Dana White said it himself. Georges St-pierre was their biggest pay-per-view box office draw. Dana White said that. And if Dana White said it, I'm pretty sure it's as good as goes. No, he's not going to lie about that. Some people thought that Brock Lesnar was. I think he probably was the second biggest draw in the UFC. But Georges St-pierre was the guy. He was the draw. He was the guy that was bringing in the most amount of money. So, Anderson Silva versus Georges St-pierre, I think personally that is the bigger fight, because that's the fight that's going to draw the most money. That's the fight that, that a lot of fans around the world, like Georges St-pierre has a huge fan base in Canada. And not even necessarily just Canada, the UK, everywhere. Georges St-pierre is loved everywhere. I don't really hear people say that they hate Georges St-pierre. Although people claim that Georges St-pierre is a little boring, they say that his fights are a little boring because he doesn't try to finish guys. He only try to win on points. But despite the fact that this guy has a bit of a reputation for having boring fights, people still pay. So it really doesn't matter. They're still spending their hard-earned money. They're still spending their dollars on Georges St-pierre. So they obviously don't really mind that much because they're still paying to see this guy. Georges St-pierre and Anderson Silva, that's the bigger fight. Now, the better fight might be Anderson Silva versus Jon Jones. That might be the most interesting fight. But the bigger fight that's going to generate the most amount of money, I feel, is Georges St-pierre versus Anderson Silva. Why? Because Georges St-pierre is the bigger draw. He's the biggest draw in the company. Not Anderson Silva, not Jon Jones. It's Georges St-pierre. So, those are my thoughts. Those are my opinions on that. Go ahead and comment on this video. Tell me, which one you think is the bigger draw? Remember, the bigger draw, the fight that's going to make the most amount of money. The bigger draw. Not which fight you rather see the most, but which fight do you think is the bigger draw? So, this was Jones. If you haven't done so, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel for more of my MMA videos and my other videos, of course. This is Jones. If you haven't done so, subscribe to my channel. I'm out. Deuces.